So now it is my great pleasure to introduce the round table, Harvesting Digital Transformation for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I welcome to the stage our roundtable moderator, Francis West, and the speakers. Francis West is the founder of Francis West Co., a friend since the inception of G3ICT, in fact, in 2006. She serves as the G3ICT Strategy and Development Committee Chair, and is the author of Authentic Inclusions, Drives Disruptive Innovation. So Francis will introduce the speakers with her, but I welcome all on the stage. Anil Lewis, Executive Director of the Jerninger Institute, National Federation of the Blind. Bianca Prince, Global Head of Accessibility at ING Global Business Accessibility. Gautam Rao, Global Head of Accessibility at Ernst & Young. And Howard Rosenblum, CEO of the National Associations of the Deaf. So thank you.
Good morning. We did catch you.
So good morning. I hate to follow John Kemp. He always gives a 5.0 speech, and it's really hard to top that. But maybe I have a chance today because I'm absolutely excited to moderate this panel. I think this is probably the most diverse panel I have ever moderated in terms of gender, race, abilities, and everything. And what we're going to do is really kind of carry on the conversation that John has set for us, which is really think about how the whole topic with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has evolved over the years, especially in the business setting, and how does accessibility or digital inclusion fits into that. And as a panelist, we kind of had a prep call, and we talked about, how do we, based on our individual experience, and view the whole topic of DEI. And especially we know that in the past, I would say 5 years, there seems to be a surge of a focus on DEI. And I know that I noticed that when I hate to say retired because it makes me old, but when I graduated from IBM 2016, there was this real sense, especially in the technology industry, how we need diversity. And that actually prompted me to write this book, Authentic Inclusion Drives Disruptive Innovation. And the key word is really authentic, because I felt like at least the area that I was involved for the last 10 or 15 years at IBM in the accessibility area, a lot of time disability was not part of the DEI discussion. So I always questioned when I had a chance to discuss this topic with especially the C-suite executives, that authenticity, where is the authenticity when it comes to DEI? So with that, we kind of thought about maybe we'll start this as a kind of a broader umbrella discussion about what we each see as to, in the context of DEI, where digital inclusion fits in. So I'm going to start to my left with Anil, who of course is the CEO of the National Federation of the Blind. So Anil, if you don't mind, maybe spend a minute introducing your organization and give us your perspective on that.
Sure. Thank you, Francis, and thank you for the promotion to CEO. President Mark Riccobono.
We're all CEOs here.
I'm the Executive Director of Blindness Initiatives for the National Federation of the Blind. It's a pleasure to be here. The National Federation of the Blind is an organization of blind people that knows that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future. See, every day we raise expectations for blind people because we realize it's those low expectations that create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. We believe you can live the life you want, and that blindness is not what holds you back. And in order for us to live the lives we want to be included as part of the whole DEI model, and we recognize the value that we bring to the table. So I'm very pleased that we're able to have this discussion today.
Bianca?
I'm Bianca Prins, Global Head of Accessibility at ING Bank. We're a European bank with a global footprint. And for us, accessibility is a starting phase. I started in 2017 making banking accessible for people with disabilities based on the business idea. We also have European legislation coming up, and from that we're far behind on the US because the European Accessibility Act is only at a starting phase. So we don't know even the law in many countries yet because it still has to be written. That's a hard one. At the same time, it's really important to include everybody in banking because without access to money, you cannot join the economy. So from that perspective, it's of huge importance to include accessibility in banking.
Gautam?
So I'm Gautam Rao, Head of Digital Accessibility. So, one of our challenges is that of scale. So we're a huge company, 360,000 people. And, accessibility and DEI covers everything, right? How we recruit people, how we onboard them, how we train people, and, how we enable them to do their work, as well as how we deliver services to clients. So, we do have the right tone at the top, but however, operationalizing that is obviously a work in progress, and that's what we work hard for.
Howard?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Howard Rosenblum. I'm the CEO of the National Association for the Deaf, which is the oldest civil rights organization in the United States. We were founded in 1880 of, by, and for deaf and hard of hearing United States citizens. We represent 4.8+ million individuals in the country with different diversity issues, education, employment, technology. And so we try to make sure for employment within the corporate world for deaf and hard of hearing individuals that are seeking promotions. And so we focus on DEI-A, as mentioned by President Biden in his executive order. Historically, the DEI discussion has ignored individuals with disabilities, and so we are trying to change that moving forward. And we want to make sure that all conversations with DEI also include accessibility.
Yeah, I know in part of our prep call, we talked about there is a little bit of, I don't want to say controversy, but call it out DEI and A, right? And I think Anil or Howard, maybe one of you said that shouldn't A be an underpinning of DEI? And so on that note, could you share your perspective as should the A be called out? Because there are also, some of you know, there are DEI-B, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So all of a sudden there's all these extra word after DEI. So I'm interested to hear from you all as to, are there benefit of it calling out A as an additional area, or maybe not?
Sure, I'd love to speak to that. I think there's benefit. In our discussion, it was brought up as, I guess, basically what John was saying in his keynote. We would like to think that accessibility is included in the whole DEI equation. So two things. One, I think it never hurts to call out accessibility. But my particular position is if it's not really included in DEI and an understanding of DEI, accessibility will always be considered something extra. And as long as it's considered something extra, then it'll never really fully be included in all of the other formats and all the other decisions that are being made. So my thing is, yes, we can call out DEI-A and make sure people are aware that accessibility is an issue, but it really won't be transformative until, even to elaborate on what John was saying earlier, the real return on investment is not seen as making accessibility in addition to what we do, making it an integral part of what we do. And then it's not about how many people with disabilities are we going to include to generate more revenue, but as we develop products and services that are accessible, not only will you get more people with disabilities as customers, but you'll be creating the best service or the best device. And that's the real return on investment. When you have the best service or the best device for the market, then it's not just a matter of the population of people with disabilities moving that needle. It's putting you above everybody else in the market.
I know, Howard, you have a point you want to make.
Yeah, and I agree with Anil. Often there has been a needed discussion of failures within the business world, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that conversation has been happening, but unfortunately within that DEI conversation, very often disabilities are not a part of that. So we need to make sure that the corporate world really understands by having diversity and inclusive and equitable employment, they need to make sure that their products and services are accessible to everyone. And their employees should reflect the community that they're serving. So unfortunately, we are having to call out the A to make sure that that's emphasized for the corporate world. And eventually, maybe we won't need it, but I think we do now.
Yeah, so the DEI world, as it stands today, seems to be more kind of embraced or talked about on the HR side of the business. And whereas accessibility is really more on the technology side. So I want to ask a question of Bianca and Gautam. You're from the industry side or private sector side. Like I remember when I first, like I said, we graduated from IBM, I did a search of inclusion and CIO, and there was actually no hit. So that was very telling. So basically, it's like there is a chasm between in organization who cares about inclusion and who cares about technology. So in other words, the CIO, the technologists, really don't think about inclusion, and inclusion is just left to the HR. So I would like to ask Bianca and Gautam, you're from ING and also for E&Y's perspective, do you see the merging or coming together of the CIO/CTO office with, the HR on the top of a DEI or not?
If that's okay, I go first. One thing at first, and that's in connection to this and connection to the previous question, is I said already a few years ago, D&I cannot work without accessibility. Accessibility can work without D&I. And that's also coming together in this question. Because if we want to be an inclusive and if we want to provide equity for everybody, we need to be accessible. That's the baseline to do this. If you want to start a hiring program, you're not accessible, people are going to fall out of the system and you lose a lot of high talented people because you're not accessible. If we want to do this right, then we have to bring all the elements together. And technically, I don't see it within IT. I don't see it within HR. I see it from operational perspective. That's why I really urge within ING to keep accessibility within operations. Because from operations, we can reach out to HR, we can reach out to IT, we can reach out to all business units within the bank to include accessibility. And yes, it took us a long time. And at the same time, I see all the things growing everywhere worldwide. I see a bank card, which not an accessible bank card, which is not a special product. No, it's a standardized product in 2 of our major markets already and more to follow. It's about digital accessibility improving in another space. So from that perspective, we have a physical and a digital product already. We could not have done it from HR or from IT.
Got it?
Yeah. So yeah, I think just going back to the previous one, I also think that accessibility should definitely be part of DEI. And our chief diversity officer says there's no equity without accessibility. So I think that's obvious. But from for your specific question, I think DEI and accessibility is actually a lever for digital transformation, right? So we are looking at new ways of working now, and now is the time to seize the moment because we have a lot of different models, and we are thinking of how we deliver services, how we do our work. So it is a cross-cutting function that really impacts everybody. It goes beyond technology, HR, marketing, service delivery, everything. And at EY we are kind of looking at it that way. So I work with our global vice chair for transformation, who oversees about 50,000 technologists who are kind of seeing how we change our ways of working. So I think it's really important to embed it at that level and then trickle it down so that we can operationalize it. So that's how we are looking at it.
I'm so glad that Gautam mentioned the word transformation. I can tell you that 10 years ago when Enabling was first starting, I don't think many people will tie the word accessibility with business transformation. So from that standpoint, we really have come a long way. And we're beginning to see some of what I call the innovators companies, especially in the private sector, is beginning to understand this. And then also, I think Gautam, the point, and also Bianca, the point you made, that we're beginning to see the company really taking a more holistic view. Instead of just looking at the accessibility as a quote-unquote fixing the problem on the product side or to meet, ADA, WCAG 2.0, whatever requirement from compliance standpoint, they're beginning to see the quote-unquote the bigger picture, right? So, from that standpoint, I think because some of you know that my history when I was in IBM, the IBM Accessibility Center actually was in IBM Research, so it's truly about innovation. So the question I have is, as we evolve as we evolve as a society in general, and assuming DEI is going to be center, I think John again pointed out that with the next generation, especially Gen Zers, we see them that really ask and want to have genuine, authentic equity in workplace. They want to see it, they want to live it. Then that means that as technologists that we are in this room, how do we think about the DEI in terms of its articulation in, for example, the new technologies such as metaverse and all that? So from your individual work area or experience, what kind of advice that you would have or give to, for example, both the technologists and also the business executives, that why is it so compelling to have, disability experience or accessibility, standards built into their thinking?
So, so I can say, so I think one of the recent changes we've seen is, because of various challenges, that the, pandemic and economic downturn, it has a disproportionate impact on disadvantaged communities, right? So many of whom are multiply challenged, they're dealing with disabilities, poverty, gender, all that stuff. So I think it's not sustainable, it's destabilizing, right? So that's something that from a personal perspective, somebody cannot get an employment perspective. From a corporate level, they can't find the right talent or get their work done from the employees, or from a societal aspect. So the positive thing, however, is like you said, I think companies are thinking more holistically, and more of them are adopting this environmental, social governance framework. We keep seeing reference to the UN Sustainable Development Goals as well. So I think DEI fits nicely with the social aspect of it. So I think it's time to kind of synergize and move towards in the same direction. And of course, from EY perspective, Carmine DiCibio is one of the iconic CEOs Valuable 500, which is another great initiative. And so we have the right tone at the top, and then operationalizing that is always an ongoing process.
I would like to add, I think that on behalf of a person who's a minority and a person with a disability, without including representatives from these disenfranchised populations, again, going back to the development of an inferior product, I remember hearing on a podcast once that the little automatic dryers, you put your hand underneath, that discriminated against black people. I'm like, that's ridiculous. And I went to one of the rest stops, and I got my hand and all underneath, nothing. I put my little white shirt sleeve underneath, zzz, all of a sudden it blows. So obviously they didn't have enough people that looked like me beta testing that particular product, right? So again, it makes it the best product in the class. But the other piece is being involved in it, because we've always been the beneficiaries of everybody else's goodwill. I've seen so many people come to me. This is $26, this white cane, with all these wonderful transformative ideas of how we can develop a cane for blind people that's even better, and it's $2,500. So no, that's not realistic. But I think that the real beauty of inclusion is that we are awesome. Every day I wake up and I walk into a world that is not made for blind people. So that requires me to strategize in the moment, every time coming up with strategies and solutions to problems. What team wouldn't benefit from that unique perspective around problem solving to any, yeah, exactly. I mean, we look, and we have to do this as people with disabilities, forcing it on you, right? We want curb cuts. Oh, that's too expensive. Now everybody's using them. You're welcome. We want captioning. Oh my God, that's just too difficult. Now everybody's reading them in the sports bars because they can't hear the sound, you know? We want audio description. Oh no, that just costs too much. But now sighted people are watching movies while they're cleaning their homes because they don't have to be sitting in front of the set to enjoy a television. You're welcome. So that's why DEI and disability needs to be included in this whole discussion.
And from that in perspective, it is that data that we need. We need data about disability. We need data about minorities. Because one of the hugest challenges, which we actually recently discussed with a group in the Netherlands, is that AI, for example, is one of the big discriminators because they don't have the data. If the data is not there, it does not exist. And that happens in so many businesses, is that without data, disability is not visible. An accessibility issue is not visible when it's not registered. So as long as they don't see that in the example you used with not being visible based on your skin, if it's not registered, it's not an issue. As long as and that's the big problem. It's for every minority the same issue. We need data, and we need the ability to register the data, because a lot of the privacy regulation actually blocks it, which is on one side it's good, but on the other side it also prevents a lot of businesses to use the opportunities which are there, because we can measure on accessibility data. We don't have to measure a disability, we can measure accessibility issues. We have to find a way. Without that, it's not going to work.
Well, and this is Howard speaking. I agree with everything that's been said. If we're looking at a lot of innovation, especially in AI, things are being done by generally white, able-bodied men. And a lot of the data that comes from AI innovation has bias. And that often excludes the needs of people with disabilities or other minority groups. So by including individuals with disability in the development of AI, in the innovation that is going on, it makes innovation on the back end accessible, as opposed to making it retroactive and retrofitting that. So if we look at how the metaverse continues to expand, it needs to reflect the meta-abilities, if you will, of all that need to be included in that process of innovation, working together, as opposed to working in silos. We need to do all of this together, inclusion, accessibility, and that will make the metaverse better and more accessible for all of us from the get-go.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think people talk about innovation and think that it's something that you need to think hard about, but actually if you include people with diverse abilities, that's their natural way of functioning. They always have to problem solve, think innovatively, so they are innovators out of the box, right? You get ideas from them right away, so including them is a business imperative. We have to do it.
So this word about innovation, that's really about forward-looking, and And Bianca, you mentioned data. I'm actually have mixed feelings about data now. I mean, of course, after spending 37 years in IBM, a big corporation, global corporation, you measure everything, right? I mean, there's always metrics, there's always KPI, because you cannot scale and you cannot sustain if you don't measure it. But as I walk around and as I start having some time to think about this whole thing, especially in the DEI space, I almost feel like that we actually have to really put the data aside sometimes and really think what I call human first, which I kind of outline in my book, because if we start looking at data, data is a reflection of the past, right? I mean, you only collect data that something has happened. But if you're going to look forward into the future, there's no data, in theory, right? When Steve Jobs, for example, invented, the iPhone, there's no data out there that the people will like to swipe left, swipe right. He imagined from a human perspective. I mean, some of you probably know that he even, spent a lot of time studying the font style. How, for example, a certain cursive font size is better. Now we know, for example, if you are learning, you have some learning disability, a certain font size with certain spacing is better for you. I mean, little things like that. Who would have thought that there's actually science behind that? But that's really putting what I call the, kind of human first, thinking in play here. So I of the opinion, I don't know what the panelists think, is that, perhaps as we invent these, as these new technology coming on, the Web3, the metaverse, that for any company that do not think human first and have the diversity of people as part of their, not even the design team, but their concept team, they're missing the boat. Like what John earlier said, they just cannot build something that really is inclusive. So what's your reaction to the comment that I just made?
If you're okay, I go.
Howard first.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. This is Howard. The important thing is to make sure that whatever the innovation is, that there are multiple options, not just a one-size-fits-all or a standard operation of use, but to have options, ways to use it, preferences that you can select so that individuals can adjust it and accommodate their own needs, so not that everyone is stuck with an out-of-the-box use. There's been a big issue with a lot of things in the past being with limited options, as opposed to having those features available to everyone.
When it comes to innovation and when it comes to accessibility and when it comes to data, it's quite simple. And in regard to your question, because I would love to have 5 million and I would know how to spend it to improve the bank. And I would love to have it without having to show the data and without having to prove a business case. And I know I can make a huge difference, and I know I can make it multiply very easily. But the thing is, and that's quite the challenge, is we have to find a way between what is required if we want to build a business case to get things going within the corporation and to do what you dream about. And I think from perspective, if we look at people like Steve Jobs, we need people like Steve Jobs. And I think a lot of people who are working in accessibility are Steve Jobs themselves, because we innovate, because we think. Me too, I created an accessibility customer journey assessment, which we can use to improve our products, to build accessibility right from the start. The thing is, I need to sell it within the organization. So we have to find one way of being that Steve Jobs, and at the second time also a way to work with the old world. Because we all believe in a new world of accessibility, sustainability goals, all the things we see benefiting the whole world from accessibility. But we still need to make other people see it. And for that, unfortunate, I'm not happy with it either, Francis, we still need the data.
Well, okay, on that
Can I
note,
offer one?
yeah, sure.
I'm all good with data, and I think that you should be data-driven, but you have to be careful that you don't introduce an unnecessary bias in the evaluation of that data. We do a lot of surveys, right? And just to my point earlier, someone trying to test the return on investment of increasing some solution, they may push a survey out, and they may just push it out to blind individuals and say, how many of you would use my product if I did this? And being a diverse group of people, maybe, maybe not, rather than pushing the survey out broadly and asking the broader community, how many of you would like a product that you could operate using speech? So you have to be careful about being data-driven, and to your point, I think it's not data-driven. You have to have a co-pilot of humanity as well, because there are so many components that, again, you're not going to be able to capture in a quantitative fashion. So I think of the humanity piece as focusing more on that qualitative data study that opens up. But then I also end echoing what Howard says. When you include more people, this is the whole DEI piece, with different perspectives and different opportunities to generate different solutions, then you're allowed to come up with options that allows you to customize in a way, and that's going to give you broad appeal to everybody. It's not just one silver bullet answer that is the universal design. The universal design means that people can customize their experience.
Mm-hmm. So in this room, we are all believers, right? I mean, of accessibility, because we're kind of self-selecting group here. We want to learn from each other. We want to, continue this, promote this journey. But we also know that there are people who just don't get it, right? So I want to ask the panelists, this is like, based on, again, in your work, in your journey, what are some of the challenges when you, quote unquote, try to sell accessibility or digital inclusion, either to your peers or to your executive or to your funders, to whoever? What are some of the challenges you see, and what are some of the, or the rationale or the value proposition you give them to turn them around to be your advocate?
So, I can start. So I think, so in our case, we do have fairly good support at the executive level. But I think operationalizing that is always a challenge, right? So taking it to the middle layers and then, the technical people who need to do the do. So I think education is key, right? So even though, CEOs say, yeah, we are committed to this, you need to educate at different levels repeatedly, awareness at certain levels, little knowledge at, little basic knowledge at, certain levels, and then deep technical training. So all that needs to happen on a continuous basis. And so we think of it in terms of 3 E's, right? So educate, elevate, and embed. So education is the piece I just talked about. Elevation is essentially taking up all these, guidelines and best practices, making them requirement. You have to do it, right? It's a policy, it's a requirement, it's a must-have. You must do it, right? So making it part of your business process. And then embedding is, then taking them and putting them into the different methodologies and processes and how you do work. So that's how we try to do it. But it's always a work in progress. Getting support and leadership, and sometimes having to do bespoke kind of models for each business function or enterprise or group. For a large company, there'll be subcultures within the company culture. So that's what happens.
Howard?
So this is Howard signing. From an advocacy perspective, the disability advocate community is very frustrated with businesses thinking of disability as something that they just check off their list. It's just part of their to-do list that they run through, and it's very superficial thinking. It's more than that. We need to think about what we're doing, what can change the world, what products can help everyone, and make people with disabilities a part of that discussion. Not just meeting the needs of your checklist. It's not that simple. We need to be more engaged in the work and in the environment from the top levels so that we can all work together better.
I would offer the National Federation of the Blind, counter to our public perception, are really great partners with business. And when we have those partnerships, we can lend our lived experience and our expertise to help infuse accessibility from our perspective so that it happens correctly within that whole development and design process and comes up with an accessible product or service. But in those instances, unfortunately, when the partnership is not available, we still are responsive to our members, and we do have to litigate, and there's some key individuals in the audience that are key to our success in that particular arena as well. But what I've really found out is after we've gone through the process of litigating and getting them to finally comply with what we were graciously asking them to do in the beginning, I asked them, why were you so resistant? And they said, well, we thought it was going to be harder and more expensive than it was. And actually, litigation ends up being harder and more expensive than the actual implementation of accessibility. So I think that what we do is we continue to tell those stories, right? And then people can really come on board earlier, recognizing that this is the least resistive path to success. But the problem that I'm dealing with now, I don't want to call it a problem because it's really exciting, and I don't have the solution for it now, is we're living in the world of the 88 generation. There are individuals out there who are power brokers in this space that grew up in a world where they had the rights codified through law. And this whole disability justice, zealous, in your face, we demand it kind of thing, I love it, but I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to help our corporate partners because the time for grace is almost gone. It's an expectation for, damn it, it better be there. And I don't know how to deal with that. So I'm interested to see what fires are lit and how we can actually create a systemic change given that new environment.
That was... I can definitely understand where you're coming from. You know, like maybe we're kind of old school, you know, because we're really old.
But we look good.
Right, yeah, that's right. And that there is a understanding of how advocate in the business has to. It's almost like the Chinese Tai Chi, it's the yin and the yang, right? And you don't want to bounce off each other. You still want to dance together. And even though there are times it's very hard to learn the steps, but once you really learn the steps, it's more harmonious and it's actually more sustaining because it's a win-win situation. But we are in a situation, maybe because whatever it is, the whole world seems to be more around the colliding kind of momentum. So I think especially for people like myself and you and for all of us who's been in this journey for a while, maybe we do have to have another session and pour our heads together to how do we understand the sentiment of the younger generation and their expectation, but then move the dynamics so that it's more satisfying, so to speak. Bianca, do you have a comment we want to make? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the thing is, and I think it all comes together. 2 years ago, our chair for Enable Employee Research Network at ING, Marlene, she came to me and she said, I've got somebody who needs to build a business case for a workplace accommodation. Why? And I think from that perspective, that part about having to build a workplace accommodations business case. Why would you need to build a business case to do your job? That's strange. And that triggered me based on the fact that I was looking into it. And in the Netherlands, you need to go to your company doctor and he has to confirm you have a disability. And then, if you're lucky, you get the right accommodation. In a lot of cases, you don't because you get a cheaper one. Meaning that productivity is way too low for people with a disability. How can we improve that? And then it comes in the part of taking out that company doctor, looking into what you can provide in a standardized way that's easier for IT, for example, when it comes to screen readers or braille devices, make sure you have a simple list of what you use, they know what to test for, and make that available, and not via a company doctor, but just via the ICT portal. What software you request, you can request the software what you need. It took me 2 years. I have it now for 2 software, so it's only for 2 accommodations yet. But I'm trying to get it for more workplace accommodations. Take out all the barriers, because if you take out the barriers, then you don't end up with 60% of the people not requesting the right workplace accommodations they need. That's a lot of lost productivity. And the young people, they don't ask for it anymore. They demand to have it. And it's their right to demand to have it.
Yes.
So I think we're actually, I don't know whether we're supposed to leave time for a quick Q&A, but I don't want to kind of make a final comment and then get the audience to respond to that. You know, when I started this accessibility journey, it was an accidental journey in the sense that I didn't know anything about disability or accessibility. I kind of fell into the job. I went for the job in IBM Research. Once I took it, I was like, oh my God, this is something I've never been exposed to. But then what I realized, where else can you find a job when you apply technology that benefit humanity? And at the very beginning, I just had the intuition that this is a lot bigger than a commercial problem that like a company like IBM is trying to solve. This is a societal problem that I really need to educate myself by learning from the advocacy groups, right? So we actually, John Kemp was actually one of the first advisors I went to see, and then G3ICT later. So I think fast forward, John mentioned that SDG, the UN Sustainable Development Goal. In the past, I would say 20 years, for private sectors, frankly, 20 years ago, nobody cared about what UN does. It's just these aspirational people doing things. But now, fast forward, I think the change of the environment, the climate change, maybe the green movement has made a lot of the CEO executive understand that we really need the knowledge of some of the NGOs and advocacy groups. So on that note, I want to ask the final question, which is to what extent do you see the advocacy group and private sector's collaboration? Have you seen the difference in terms of its collaboration, and what is your view going forward in terms of the relationship? Because we have a lot of NGOs and advocacy groups along with private sector companies.
So from our perspective, we see definite synergy. So EY is involved with many of them. If you count disability in or enabling or valuable 500, so we are all participating that in fully. And where we see that is it pulls together peer companies and gets that larger scale of the entire industry to move forward in one direction. So we definitely see that as a positive and see value in that.
So I'd like to offer. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. National Association for the Deaf partners with a lot of corporations to help identify where they can make changes for accessibility, especially during COVID. Using Zoom, using Microsoft Teams, figuring out how video conferencing platforms can be accessible to individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, be it caption or sign language. One good example of collaboration is that we didn't have to wait until the next crisis to work through what we were currently needing for our daily lives to be functional, whatever the platform was. And that ended up benefiting everyone who was using it for a better future. So a lot of those collaborations happened with corporations, and they actually reached out to us at NAD and wanted to collaborate with us.
Anil?
I would answer this question by making an appeal. And first of all, thanks, Axel, for putting this forum together and continue to evolve it to what it's become today. And I would be remiss if I didn't embarrass you publicly, Francis, by letting everybody know that authentic inclusion was a visionary piece, which I think we're finally coming into what you already prescribed. But I think that the key is when we talk about community in this particular forum, what do you guys define that as community? Do you see that as the accessibility community? Because the accessibility community is not necessarily the disability community. It's a significant aspect of my ability to live a quality life. So my appeal, along with the disability ends and the value 500s, which I recognize their communities are the C-suites, et cetera, my appeal is for you to become part of our community. the disability community and really have us actively participating in the work that you do and actually being in decision-making roles and actually being able to allow you to benefit from the value that we bring to the table. And I think that with that, then what you wrote in Authentic Inclusion comes that much closer to actually being real. So.
I completely agree with you on that, Anil, because the thing is actually what we did at ING when we started our steer group on accessibility is that I urged to include our employee network for people with disabilities to be included in that steer co. So they are part of how we are going to make accessibility happen within ING. And yes, Enable wants more, I want more, and we have to convince the business. But we really need the voice of people with disabilities being heard by the leaders in our organization. At the same time, when it comes to the very practical level, I'm very happy to say that, for example, we work with the Dutch Federation for the Blind and people with low vision together, for example, now on setting up a improved customer service for people with disabilities. So we're really looking in how we can connect, because if I want to set out a survey to see how we can serve people best, I need to do that with the groups with disabilities and not with the general customers, because a lot of our customers don't feel included. Or how can we select? Because then we have to ask the tough question, do you have a disability? We don't want to ask. So as long as we work with disability organizations, we can get their voice. We can get the voice and the challenges and especially all the barriers we unintentionally created as a business. And we need to break them. And we cannot do that without.
Thank you. So on that note, I think we finished the panels part of the work. And now the work is on the audience. We have about 8.5 minutes left. If you have any questions, please take advantage of the panelists up here. And
we have a question over here.
Okay.
Hi, is this on? Okay. Please identify your name.
I'm Susan Masrui with AT&T and the World Institute on Disability. My question to you is, there's a lot of talk about inclusion and having the ear of leadership, but how do we get people with disabilities to be seen as leaders in the field of diversity, inclusion, and accessibility?
Well, I'll own that, and we, the National Federation of the Blind, one of our significant reasons for our continued success is we really do invest a lot of time and energy in building blind leaders and in encouraging them to go out into communities and be proactive. That's also a curse and a blessing. We get more blind people out there in those influential spaces, and there are fewer people who are able to do the work that we need to do to continue to perpetuate that. But I accept that question as a challenge, that we need to do a better job of making sure that we train and empower more individuals with disabilities to really go out there, seek, obtain, and gain the respect that they need in those leadership roles. But in order for that to happen, you know, the individuals that are at the table making those decisions as to whether those doors are open or open wide enough for us to take advantage of those opportunities still have an obligation to open their minds to make sure that they do include disability as part of this new drive for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Howard?
Yeah, this is Howard. To tack onto that, I think there's an assumption that there are already people with disabilities out there trying to market themselves as DEI experts. And so we need to look at how are corporations handling their recruitment. How are they hiring people with disabilities to be leaders within their company, to provide that full access for job interviews, even the application process. So that way people can stand up and take those roles within corporations is what we're looking at now.
Bianca.
I think also in respect, in my case, I have a disability. I am the global head of accessibility. And what question I got a lot of the times at first is, are you able to do this? You're working part-time. And that's the real thing. Stop asking that question. Look at what people can do. And in the second part, for my behalf too, and I think other people who work as accessibility leads with limited visible disabilities or invisible disabilities, we should share that more. And it's not always easy because we grew up in corporates where you not share your disability, but if we step up more, it also helps other people to get to those roles. So from that perspective, I also take your question up as a challenge to share this more.
Yeah, I completely agree with Bianca. So, I mean, I'm neurodivergent, I have a disability myself, but I think in EY what we've done is this notion of storytelling. So we have, C-suite leaders, because everybody has a connection, either personal or family or friend, to disability, to come out and, talk about that freely. And that raw, unvarnished story changes mindsets and lets people know that, you can get there.
Well, earlier, Gautam, you mentioned that education is the key. I mean, to me, few people are born leaders, but the rest of us has to be learned, had to be educated. And I remember way back, some of you know Terry Hartman, that about, I think 15 years ago, there was a joint program with the UCLA, like an MBA program, that companies like IBM would send our people with disabilities as a high potential leaders to those programs. If you think about in the business world, a lot of the executive will go to Harvard, executive program or Wharton and all that. I think the equivalent maybe should be re-established or reestablished and have a very focused, on promoting or the skill sets of not just leaders, but senior leaders in corporation. Maybe this could be a takeaway, something that we examine, as a community. Any other question?
Hi, my name is Suzanne Levine. I'm with the County of Marin in California, just north of San Francisco. I'm have a bit of a disability community introspective question in that the representation of people with disabilities, of all disabilities, and how that happens when we are working with businesses, government, whomever. Often, even when we look at the WCAG, it doesn't include accommodations or interactions with people with various disabilities. As a person with a disability, that's not included in the WCAG. When I work with my team and identify areas of that need some changes, there's resistance. So I guess my question is, what can we do to be more inclusive about the diversity of disability and how that gets integrated when we work with across government, across vendors, businesses?
If you're okay, I go from that one short. Very practical, what I notice a lot is a lot of testing is done based on personas and not by people. And I think that's one of the key things. And that's why I included, when I wrote the customer journey assessment to include accessibility, is actually include, when it comes to digital, for example, is WCAG, universal design, and finally approval by testing with people, by people, because we really need that. And if it's not, you have to go back to square one.
You have a comment, Gautam?
Yeah, I kind of completely agree with her. So including them right from the beginning, concept stage itself through design, development, testing is what we aim for. It doesn't happen all the time, but from our methodology perspective, that's what we shoot for.
Well, I want to thank you for holding your attention for, hour and a half. And and this is a great panel, and I think all of us are sticking around for to the rest of the conference. So if you have any other questions, feel free to come up individually. But again, thank you very much to this great panel.
Thank you, Francis, and distinguished speakers. Thank you very much for your insights. It's showcase time now. We are opening our exhibit, and we welcome you to have a 30 minutes break.